Today we're going to talk about expressions. In the book there's one expression, which we're going to explain soon. An expression is usually something which is a bunch of words that are used in a way that doesn't quite sound like the real thing. So for instance, if your parents said, "You're driving me up the wall," there's no driving going on. You're not actually going up the wall. It just means that you might be making them feel a little bit crazy. If you said something like, "Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater," that's an expression that means don't throw out my idea just because that idea came along with something else. So it doesn't quite mean what it sounds like, but it's a fun way to talk. And it's lots of the expressions that you use, people will know them in general. So if you learn these, you'll be able to use them. This one here, in this story, it was an older person who came along and said, "What the dickens do you plan to make with this box?" Well, the word dickens, it is something that means what on earth. The word dickens, it's used as an expression. The next thing I want to show you about these words is how we can break them up into different ways. So, words have different functions. Like for instance, projects is a thing. It's something that is a thing, like a pen or a mouse or a person. It's a thing. It's a project. A dumpster is also a thing. So we're going to circle those the same. I'm going to put a circle around those two words. They're called nouns. A cockpit is also a thing. You can't say, "I cockpitted down the road." It's not something that you do. A tempest is a thing. And those are the only words that are things. We call those nouns. Now, and finally, a strap is a thing. But we're going to talk about how that can be used in a different way. If you're holding on to a strap, it's a thing. However, if you strap something down, now you're using the word like an action. So instead, we would put a rectangular box around that. If you want to, you can join along at home and split these words up into different groups. So you strap something down. Now you're using the word like an action. I strap, I jump, I run. Those are actions. Propped. When you propped something up, it's an action. Inspected. When you inspected something, it's an action. Melted. Action. So we're putting boxes around the actions, or the verbs, and ovals around the nouns or the things. Today, as you read the story, I want you to notice the illustrations. I want you to think about how has the author used the illustrations to show imagination. If I flick through to this page, why have they chosen to have the kids dressed up as pirates, even though we know they weren't? On this page, why did they choose to show animals, even though there were none? They're in outer space. There are a number of things in this story where the illustrator has been quite poetic with his language and with his illustrations. So I want you to talk about, why do you think he chose to do that? The next thing we're going to do is a retell. What I want you to do is, in a moment, without looking through the book, you're going to think about what you remember from the story using first, next, then, finally. You might need a few more fingers, so that's okay if you explain that. But what I want you to do is to pick out the most important details of the story. So, You might not want to keep talking on forever, but you might want to explain to your parent or your brother or sister what it is that are the most important things. If you start picking out things like the box was orange, your buddy might say, was that the most important detail? Because when we retell a story, we want to be thinking about what are the main things to pick out. So, pause the video, and what I want you to do is go first, next, then, finally. Try and explain the story in 4 or 5 points, just on one hand. Sometimes when my kids miss out on something, they feel pretty disappointed. And they say, this is never gonna be the same. This is the worst day ever. And I have to turn around to them and say, is this really the worst day ever? Or, what's the attitude of your hearts right now? Because typically, we might think that something really great that's happened and gets ruined or destroyed, like a box, it might never feel like it's going to be good again. But the truth is, that's just not true. Things are remakeable and things are reusable, and we can have new experiences. As you read through the story today, I want you to be thinking to yourself, what are some of the attitudes of the children when the box melts? How do they deal with it in the story? Pause the video and talk to your parents about how they deal with their attitude when the box melts. Go. The next thing I want you to think about is, how do they feel about the box? What are their feelings towards the box when they first get it? Do they see it as just a big pile of junk? Does anybody else see it as a big pile of junk? Pause the video and talk about these questions. Have you ever not wanted to stop doing something and your parents have said, okay, it's time to stop? Well, in this story they talk about it as drizzling when it rains and as a tempest. It can be both of those things, because drizzling is only a little bit of rain and a tempest is an enormous amount of rain. So why do they first describe it as drizzling, and then secondly they immediately describe it as a tempest? Which is it? And why do you think they've used both of those terms in the same page? Pause the video, and I want you to talk to your parents or a buddy about this. Okay, now that you've been asked a few comprehension questions, I want you to move on to the story, and you can read it on Flyleaf on the app or on the website. Once you've done that, there'll be an activity to follow up with. Happy reading!